Hello, what's up guys? I'm Kyle from KGR, and I'm a bit of a Crash Bandicoot fan. I grew up with the PS1 era as a kid, and being a kid during that era, of course I wanted action figures. So ReSaurus were the people to go to for those figures. There were other toy companies that made Crash toys, but when it came to traditional action figures, ReSaurus was the way to go. You would be able to find these toys at places like Toys R Us, KB Toys, or surprisingly enough, Hess gas stations. But just like all those companies, ReSaurus went under and they all vanished, including the Crash figures. About 10 to 15 years go by, and then NECA comes along with the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy figures. Now, both of these figures go for two completely different styles, whether this one being more like the game model, this one being more like the concept art. But there's a lot of similarities between these two figures with the Jetboard, Jetpack, and Scuba sets. So I thought it'd be fun to compare these two, get nostalgic, and also get sad that you can't get these figures anymore. But let's take a closer look at these figures. Like, sure, this goes for the game model, but I love the art style of the ReSaurus figure because back then you couldn't go with the game model because it was all like super low polygon and you couldn't make a traditional action figure out of that. So they have to go to the concept arts, and then they end up sculpting these figures by hand, and they have their own distinct art style to them that I love so much. Maybe it's just rose-tinted glasses, but to me, these really stand out to be beautiful looking figures. And that was very common during the 90s era because even ReSaurus, when they did these Sonic Adventure figures, people used to put this as the best Sonic figure out there. Or when Toy Biz did their Mario Kart line, like this screams 90s Mario from the 64 era. And you could tell it's concept art because you could see like the spots on his back that you wouldn't see in the game, or the nice detail in the jeans like the rivets and the stitches and the pockets in his back. And I really love the shading in the hair as well. Like, for a $5 figure, this is beautiful. Now, normally with the Crash figures from ReSaurus, you would find these in sets. So they would come with different accessories like the Jetboard or Jetpack and stuff like that. But with NECA, you could find this figure in particular by himself. ReSaurus had something similar to that where they would have this version of Crash on a keychain, so it would just be like hanging from his head. I don't remember seeing these at places like KB Toys or Toys R Us, mainly because, hello Chloe, can I help you girl? Anyway, you wouldn't find those keychain figures at places like KB Toys or Toys R Us because the action figures were already there, so why get a keychain? So I have a feeling that these were mostly sold at places like Hess, where it was more of a convenience store than anything. And I know they had the plush because I remember seeing them as a kid. I remember seeing some other Crash Bandicoot merchandise there as well. So seeing the keychains there was probably pretty common. I only saw these things at a Hess gas station once as a child, but I remember. And it's not completely to the art style of the game as well, because like even though we have the nice detail of him having the jeans and stuff like that, the little strap that you would see on his gloves, as well as like the little square of exposing the top of his hand, isn't there. But you would see those on the plush, just not the action figures. And also the PS1 concept art had him with 5 fingers while this has 4. So it's not one-to-one, but it was great at the time. And as great as these figures looked, they were mainly stuck in mostly a static pose. Some other toy companies did this as well, especially Toy Island with their Sonic Adventure figures, where even though they were technically articulated around the shoulders and the hips when it came to just being on a swivel, it wasn't really meant to like be in a proper pose to be like played as an action figure. It was meant to be like in a pose, be done, and that's it. But speaking of articulation, you also had movement at the waist as well as movement in the wrists, but the ReSaurus figures are so fragile, I don't even want to touch that. So having him do like running and front flips and stuff like that, it wasn't ideal as a kid, so I played with the plush more than the actual action figures. And Super Glue became my best friend because they broke all the time. But then when you move along to NECA, they improved everything. In fact, they did something that I didn't think was ever even possible on a Crash Bandicoot figure. They gave him neck movement. I didn't even know he had a neck. Like, if you compare it to this figure, like, it's just, his face is just built to his body. Like, that was it. But this, like, groundbreaking. As well as being more video game model accurate, you also had the universal shoulders, you had the bicep swivel, you had the hinge on the wrist, as well as just moving it side to side. The waist, unfortunately, isn't the best. Like, you have no like waist movement, but the hips, like, you got a little bit of movement, but not a whole lot. But you also got an ab crunch for the first time, and you got the bendable knees, and you got the ankle rockers. This was a very impressive figure. And funny enough, if you look at the timestamps on these, so like this one's gonna say 1998, and on his shoe, it's gonna say 2018. There is a 20-year difference between these two figures. And when you bought this figure, it came with a cardboard box, or a cardboard crate, I should say, that you could put together yourself. However, it was easy to miss because it was like within the packaging. Like, it wasn't done right, I don't think. In my opinion, I didn't like it. Like, I wasn't a huge fan of how the hair was painted. Like, I kind of wish it was like more distinct, like with the Crash right here for ReSaurus. But you can see like the jawstring right here, and you can see the one pocket back there. Like, this is definitely trying to go for the end game model, which does a decent job. But unfortunately, the shading on this figure makes him look like a burnt gremlin. Like, it wasn't executed as well as I wanted it to. The front looked fine, the back not so much. And you even see like a bit of a paint over like right here, like you see it like leaking onto his pants. Of course, that's gonna vary from figure to figure, but as brittle as these figures were, I noticed the ankles would give up on themselves, and the pegs like to go into the shorts were like so small, like they could easily break too, so be careful with that. But overall, this is like a more sturdy figure in comparison to ReSaurus, and you can see like the stitching in the gloves as well. Like this is overall like just a better looking figure for the most part. But even though the NECA figures looked better, the ReSaurus figures came with a whole lot more. For example, this is a ReSaurus figure in the box. So this is going to be an earlier version of this figure because his foot is flat versus being angled like that. So with the Jetboard Crash Bandicoot in particular, you got the Jetboard itself, you had a crate, a golden Aku Aku mask, a Wampa fruit peeking out, as well as a green crystal, and stickers for that crate if you wanted to customize it. And the crate was not only plastic, but you could actually open the thing up and put accessories in there if you want to. You know, like the Wampa fruit. That was about it. You couldn't really fit anything else in there. And then the back also showcased all the other figures that they were making. And look, a variety of characters. If only NECA could do that. But I digress. But what blows my mind the most about all this is that this whole package was $5 at KB Toys. No joke. We would know because my parents bought me them on a weekly basis. They would know. While this was anywhere from like $20 to $25. And you got a cardboard crate. Sure, he was more detailed and had a lot more articulation, but like, look at the difference between the two. You spend $10 on a Jack-specific figure for Sonic, and you get nowhere close to the amount of this. Insane. Pun not intended. Now let's take a look at the Jetboard versions of these figures. Now I'm not going to showcase all the accessories and stuff like that because I just went over that. So let's go over the detailing in the figures as well as the boards themselves. And as you can tell, they have a very similar facial expression, and that's going to be a very common thing we're going to find throughout this comparison. They all have the same faces. It's crazy, actually. Then Crash ended up losing the paint in his belly button. All the future figures end up losing that paint for some reason. And then the shading did get better on the figures, so I will give them that. It does look a heck of a lot better. But even though I find the art style on this figure looking really nice, this just looks terrifying. In fact, they later released a Crash from NECA where it came with like 3 extra faces as well as an Aku Aku mask on top of that. So I put the Aku Aku mask on top of this Crash because I just wanted to hide it. But unfortunately, it ended up becoming front heavy. Even if you use the NECA stands that like have like the pegs in the feet, no, it didn't really work out too well. So it'll always fall forward, and the ankles end up just becoming really weak. So that's the thing with the NECA figures. They do get weak over time. But you can see his tongue starting to stick out. But like, you can see it just like comes from the void. Like, it doesn't really look all distinct in comparison to the Crash one right here, like the ReSaurus one, where like there's a little bit more depth to it. In fact, there's like even more depth into the mouth itself. This one doesn't have that much depth. It has a little bit of depth, but not a whole lot in comparison to this. But let's take a look at the Jetboards themselves. Because when I think of the Jetboards for Crash, I think of this art style in particular because this is just what I grew up grew up on, so nostalgia, rose-tinted glasses, memories, whatever. But when you got this figure brand new, it did have a fin on here. This is what I got, so just bear with me, please. But at the time, I was so blown away with like the detail on the engine itself. Like, you would see this stuff and this stuff. I'm not an engineer. I'm sorry. But I love this flame pattern in particular so much. I love the shading on like the exhaust right here. I just thought this overall just looked so cool. And then it has a peg right here so Crash could just sit on top. And then the later figures had it so you could have the bent foot go against the engine. So he would stand upright. Look at that. Doesn't he look neat? And it also has a little bit more dimension to it, so like these floating pieces like go down more. And it was mainly meant so like when you put it with the fin, it would actually stand up properly by itself. While with NECAs, they didn't worry about that. They're trying to go for more in-game accuracy, and if you compare it to the Insane Trilogy, like this is actually represented really well. Like they did a good job doing that. They got the timing belt right here, which is actually flexible. It doesn't spin or anything, but it's there. There's no fin down here, and this is all level. You can rotate these if you want to, but that scares me. So don't do that. And you can even take this apart. I think when you get it in the box, it is apart technically. Then you just snap it together and then you're done. But I love the paint work on the exhaust, so you could tell it's definitely had some wear to it, and you can see the exhaust right there as well, like if you compare these two. I'm just going to take Crash off of this. That terrifies me. So the design definitely got revamped over the years. I'm personally more of a fan of the ReSaurus one, but again, that's just nostalgia for the most part. And there is a bit of quality control issues where the paint doesn't line up properly. But like I said, when the ReSaurus one came out, that was only like $5. When this came out, according to the fandom website, this was about $34 when it came out. And there is no peg on the board itself to keep Crash balanced. And it would have been nice to include a stand to like have it look like he's also like in the air, like being posing with it. But unlike the ReSaurus figure, you could actually pose him properly and make it look like he's doing tricks with it. So if we like put this back and do a little crunch and move these like this, move it. Oh yeah, we can also move his abs. This is not as easy as I expected. I'm sorry. But there you go. You can pose him a little bit with it. Look at that. Isn't that neat? But since he's not really attached to the board, good luck. I mean, you can put sticky tack, I guess. So you don't have to worry about pegs breaking, like with this figure. I know my childhood version of this, like both the floating pieces on the side, the fins, as well as the peg all broke off. And I also love the scuffs in the paint to make it look like it actually had some wear to it. Like, this thing is so cool. I prefer this one, but like this is cool. Next up, we have the Jetpack Crash figures. Now, at the time when this came out, like I thought it was really impressive because this matched the art style where you couldn't see his eyes. I didn't think about it as an adult that I want to see his eyes through that because that's what the art looked like, even in an in-game model. Like, it all just blended it perfectly. It looked great. But then this one came out, and the original prototype to this actually looked a little different, where the eyes were closer centered to each other, and I kind of wish they would have stuck to that a little bit. But as you can tell, both of these have the teeth smiling and grinning and scaring children. But with the ReSaurus figure, they changed the colors on him. So like, instead of having the black gloves and shoes, they went with more of the red, which would have matched the cover to Crash 2. So it made sense, added a little bit of variety to it. I liked it. And the jetpack itself looked fine. There were earlier models that, like, instead of having like this circle of orange and then just faded after that, there were ones I remember where it was more green and it had a much better transition fading. I had that as a kid, but for the life of me, I could not find that for this video. But again, same articulation, and again, same thing with articulation for this guy. Like, everything's mostly postable and all that stuff, but you can see the much better detail in this. Like, you can see like the different colors of the straps. You can see the centerpiece right there. While this doesn't completely accurately make it all look like the game or concept art. But what made the ReSaurus version much better, in my opinion, was the fact that you could take this gear off. So the jetpack just came off, and there's like two little round pegs right there, and then the rubber just came off, and then you had to like manipulate the figure in a way so you can like get the strap off. For some reason, somehow, I don't remember actually snapping the figure trying to get this off, but like you definitely gotta flex the figure a little bit in order for it to get the gear off. But this was the figure after you took all that off, and this is my favorite version of the figure personally, because I liked how the ears were down, like his static stance when he was doing Crash 2 and Crash Warped. And you can see the dust that was on here, like collecting as the gear was on. But yeah, this is my preferred Crash figure personally. While with this, as great as this looks, you couldn't take this gear off. Which, to be fair, if you wanted to Crash without the gear, you could just buy a whole nother figure. But I thought it was neat that you could take this off to make it its own separate figure. But the accuracy in the Jetpack looks so much cooler in comparison to the original. I'm nostalgic for this one, but this is accurate. This looks great. If you really want to take this gear off, you technically could. It wouldn't go back the same because you would actually technically have to like undo the glue and everything on him. And the eyebrows are like put onto his mask instead of being on Crash himself. Because the Crash figure had like moving eyebrows. I wish I had the other figure. Give me a sec.
A few moments later.
So with this Crash figure, if you wanted to make him look angry, you can. If you wanted to make him look more scared, you can. Like, the movement in the eyebrows, they're on double ball pegs, by the way. Like, the movement in the eyebrows are so interesting and surprisingly what feels necessary to add more emotion to this figure. It was really impressive. NECA did a fantastic job with this figure. But when it came to the irises, like, and pupils being in the center of the eye, I guess they make it accurate. So, like, I guess this matches, but I prefer the original concept art that we saw, like the original prototype. And again, the shading on this figure is actually really good. I wish the original figure was better in shading, but that's okay. But now let's move on to Scuba Crash. And here is Scuba Crash. And this was a more recent purchase. I actually just bought this like a month or two ago, specifically for this video. And wow, they actually did a really good job like bringing the ReSaurus one to life. The shading in the hair is completely different. Like, it doesn't have like the black stripes that you would see on the original Series 1 figure. And these legs, man, they are so loose. But Crash has blue gloves instead of his original like black or red. And just like the Jetpack Crash, you could take all this gear off of him if you really wanted to. Then he has the piping that's flexible, so you could like put this in his mouth and you could take it out of his mouth if you want. And this is gonna have the regular smile that you would see on the normal NECA Crash, because this head sculpt is essentially the same as that, where it came like with how that smile is. But just like the Jetpack Crash figure, you couldn't take any of this gear off. But the accuracy to the game is uncanny. Like, even like the little scratches that you would see all over here, like just like the jet board, like it looks fantastic. In fact, they gave the ReSaurus Crash his own dedicated swim trunks for this, and they gave him knee joints for the first time. Now, Series 2 Crash figures, depending on which Crash you got, sometimes even have elbow joints. But they, as you can tell, they weren't very good. They were very loose. And they would make Crash in different art styles as well. Like the high-flying Crash, where they have him with the plane, they gave him like a whole jacket and a scarf and everything. Like they really experimented. And in Series 3, they were supposed to give him like a little winter jacket for him to ride Polar. So they got creative with these figures, and I commend them for that. They actually look really good, even though it's not game accurate. Like, I loved the art style for these. But if we take all this gear off and take a look at Crash by himself, you can see, first up, we got a whole new head sculpt where his ears are in different directions. But we got a completely different looking face too, and like the eyes are painted completely differently too. Like, that's interesting. I like that. And I'm gonna fix that later because I don't feel like doing that on camera. But even though the NECA figure is fantastic because of its like accuracy as well as articulation, the biggest thing that he's missing is the submergible that you would get from the ReSaurus. Now, the ReSaurus Crash can't really like properly use this thing all that much, but like imagine if we had one that was more to scale with this figure and you're actually able to pose him to actually ride it, because you can pose him well enough to make it look like he's swimming. That is impressive on its own. And plus, with him having his own art style too, like his own trunks that was exclusive to the figure and not the game. That is so cool. Like, nostalgia blinding me. The ReSaurus figure is just so much better. Except for the fact that he can't really use his legs all that much. And before I end things off, I want to compare some of the accessories that you would get with these figures, because both ReSaurus and NECA did come with their own accessories. It's actually a decent comparison. First off, let's start with the crates. And this is the ReSaurus one, so you could actually open this one up, and I forget where it opens. I think it opens right here. You have to have fingernails to open this up pretty well, because I struggled as a kid. So then you can open this up and then make it look like it's an actual checkpoint for him. You know, except for having this extra spot right here. Then you can close that up and be fine. While with this is one that is made out of cardboard that you have to put together yourself, and there's no stickers for it, and is also easy to miss. Now, this does scale half decently well with Crash. Hold on, let me get the figures. So, like, here he is next to this box, and then here he is next to this box. I was more a fan of the ReSaurus scale, but honestly, I don't even know if this actually scales all that well. I'm just talking on my butt at this point. But it's easy to say, oh yeah, ReSaurus was definitely better. But there is one thing that NECA absolutely outshined ReSaurus on, other than the Crash figure by itself. When you look at the Aku Aku masks, this is the one that you would get from ReSaurus, and then this is the one that you would get from NECA. As a child, I always wondered, what are these holes for? Because the holes could not work on Crash's nose. They ended up later releasing, with the high-flying Crash, you know, with the outfit and the scarf and everything, a dedicated Aku Aku mask that could actually go on Crash's nose. I used to have that as a kid. I don't know where it is now. It's been gone for years. And this more matched the concept art of the first game, where he would have, what, 6 different feathers on his head? In fact, they called him Witch Doctor, not Aku Aku. Hold on, I got receipts. Here's a copy of Crash 1. It is the greatest hits version. Just gonna scroll through. Where are the characters? There he is! Witch Doctor! Not Aku Aku. Okay, legend has it a spirit of the ancient witch doctor named Aku Aku, so it does say it in the name, but they just call him Witch Doctor up here for some reason. But anyway, even though this matched more of the concept art of him, this was definitely a lot more game accurate, and like, just overall just looked better. In fact, I love this one so much that I actually have a replica of the Aku Aku that closely resembles the Insane Trilogy version, like just hanging up right there. Unfortunately, I cover them in every video. But this one was exclusive to a set where it came with 3 extra faces, and honestly, it's probably one of the better Crash figures out there. It's fantastic. But what NECA never ended up coming out with was other accessories like the Wampa Fruit, or even the crystals. Now, the pink crystal is actually exclusive to Tiny, which is one of my favorite villains, like him and Ripperoo. So having these is so cool. And you also get like different colored versions, like you also get the gems from Series 2 and other colored crystals. So some of you may be wondering, which one is my favorite? Although I'm nostalgic for ReSaurus, and NECA did do a good job creating it, I think my favorite figure is neither. My favorite figure is the Nendoroid from Crash 4. Because look at this figure, like you can absolutely customize him. Like he is probably like the most articulated Crash figure that is out there, whether it be his double jointed neck, being able to move the hips, and you have to swap out the whole arms and elbows and stuff like that, which gets annoying. But this one gives you the option of either having open hands or fists. The NECA figures don't give you the option to have fists, which I found silly, but whatever. Now, even though this one's like kind of like its own art style a little bit because it's being Crash 4 as well as being an Nendoroid, it's such a good figure by itself. But he was expensive. So what made the Nendoroid so good is if you had the accessories from the other figures from back then. So if you had the crystal, or the Wampa Fruit, or the crates, this figure was perfect. They ended up making him like the perfect play toy. The Aku Aku mask that came with him wasn't very game accurate, unfortunately, but it looked good. If you compare it to the NECA one, not bad. The NECA one looks better because it's more detailed and that's what they go for. But the Nendoroid is very impressive, and that's why I don't buy any of the Head Start figures. The NECA one, I'm just happy with. I might buy them down the line once I expand my collection to get like Cortex and Coco from ReSaurus, and I would love to compare them to the Head Start ones, but like, I love the collection I have now. Like, this is just about all I need. However, I do wish that I did have VD Vortex's Ripperoo. That figure looks so good. I love it. But thank you for joining me on this retrospective of just comparing ReSaurus to NECA. It was so fun doing this. And thank you for watching. So if you're new and you like what you saw, you know what to do. In the description is going to be my social media. And since you hung out for this long, I'm going to let you know my next figure review. Well, it's going to be a Yu-Gi-Oh thing. But after that, we're going to be taking a look at the ReSaurus Tiny. Something I wanted as a kid for the longest time, but I finally got a couple of months ago. And he looks fantastic. Anyway, thank you for watching. I love you guys to death. And I'll see you on the next one. So peace, peace.